today I shall be talking about Dalit and protest literatures in Kannada, which brought about a major shift in the Kannada literary tradition. Some of the earlier movements in Kannada literature, they were also shaped by the social climate of the times. But what is very distinctive about the Dalit and the protest literatures, which came into existence in the 1970s, is the fact that they were directly shaped by the political and the cultural events which took place in the turbulent decade of the 1970s. Let us look at some of the major factors which shaped the climate of this very important decade in the history of modern Kannada and Kannada literature. The most important factor was the political scenario. The regime of Sri Devaraj Aras in Karnataka had brought about what is the first seminal change in the power politics as far as Karnataka is concerned. The two dominant castes in Karnataka had been hegemonic powers in the field of Karnataka politics, not only from the inception of the Karnataka state as a modern linguistic state of India, but also during the nationalist phase and the phase which is associated with the unification movement in Karnataka. It was Devaraj Aras who was able to break this political hegemony of the dominant caste by giving representation to the marginalized backward communities. It is these communities which were for the first time given an opportunity to articulate their political aspirations and their cultural aspirations. This naturally brought about not just a change in the field of power politics, but also in the field of culture. The important change was that these marginalized communities, which had for the first time been able to express their political aspirations, also started looking for a very distinctive political and social identity of their own. Coupled with this, there was also the phenomenon of the urban migration of hundreds of Dalit youth who had taken the advantage of education and reservation and had now settled down in the cosmopolitan places. It is here that they first confronted some kind of a culture shock and also began to negotiate with the challenges of a modern urban society. It became very imperative for them to evolve an identity of their own also in political and in the cultural fields. This later became one of the most important motivating factors for the emergence of Dalit literature. Another important factor was the question of the identity politics, which becomes so very predominant in the decade of the 1970s. Because of the changes which were taking place owing to the introduction of the Land Reform Act, etc., there was certainly a change which can be described both as demographic and socio-political. This change naturally also affected the hegemony of the existing powers in the field of literature and culture. The third most important factor was that even among the second generation of Navya writers who belonged to the Shudra communities, there was increasingly a feeling that it was the Brahminical literary establishment which enjoyed almost total control over the media and also the literary forms of expression, and it did not give them sufficient space in order to explore the experiences of their own backward Shudra communities. Of course, in retrospect, it is very clear that the great doyen of Kannada literature in the Navodaya or the New Dawn pre-independence period, namely Sri Kuvempu, had already made it possible for writers to introduce and explore experiences which are very distinctive to the Shudra communities. However, the second generation of the Navya writers began to feel that there was need for them to organize themselves into a pressure group and to make a frontal assault on the literary and the cultural establishment. For example, writers like Chandrasekhar Patil and others, who were also influenced by the socialist ideology as well as by the socialist organizations which had also come into existence during the same period, they started a kind of a rebellion against the hegemony of the Brahminical establishment. It's very clear that from the very beginning of modern literature in the early decades of the 20th century, the literary cultural establishment had always been Brahminical, and it was also culturally homogeneous. It had not really given, despite the efforts made by very important writers like Kuvempu, a space for the articulation of the experiences of the subalternized communities. The second generation Navya or modernist writers in Kannada wanted to achieve two objectives. The first was to try and dislodge the literary establishment and to thereby create a space for articulation of new experiences. The other was also to make a kind of a tie-up among all those progressive writers who can be described as left-leaning, to bring them together under one forum and also to make the literature of the times a little more openly committed to social responsibility and social issues. These two objectives could not be achieved without the establishment of a literary cultural association or organization. In fact, the turbulent decade of the 1970s saw the establishment of a large number of cultural and literary organizations which prevailed for a long time and had an opportunity to work as pressure groups to bring about a paradigmatic change in the cultural scenario of modern Karnataka. It was the first of the important organizations of this period was the Vakkuta, which was actually the association of the Shudra writers to begin with, and later the nomenclature was changed in order to make it a little more inclusive. It came to be called the Vakkuta, or the Association of the Kannada Writers and the Artists. These were broadly left-leaning progressive writers who were now trying to seek a new path, very different from the one which was by then consolidated by the Navya or the modernist tradition. The other two organizations which came into existence just a little later were the Lekha, which expands as the Dalita Lekhakara and Kalavidara Sangha, which translates as the Association of the Dalit Writers and the Artists. There were also many other cultural organizations during the same period. For example, there was the Pragati Pantha, there was the Socialist Youth Forum, which was functioning very vigorously during this time. All in all, one can say that the atmosphere was such that the youth of the time, led by the writers belonging to the second phase or generation of modernist literature in Kannada, were now prepared to make a frontal, open assault on the literary establishment and to bring about very seminal and major changes. Initially, the Vakkuta was able to bring together the most important writers of the generation by drafting a manifesto which was broad enough to bring together all those who wanted a sense of social commitment for literature and also an openness to a leftist perspective on literature, culture, and the structures of the society. It was from the energizing influence of Vakkuta that later the Bandaya organization or the Bandaya movement was brought into existence. The word Bandaya in Kannada can be roughly translated as rebel or rebellion. This was the protest movement which had very consciously drawn up a manifesto. Some of the important aspects of the agenda and the ideology on which the members of the Bandaya group had agreed upon were as follows. One was their sense of dissatisfaction with the way in which Kannada literature had seemed to have lost its connectivity with the Kannada community. They felt that some of the great efforts which had been made earlier by the writers of the New Dawn or Navodaya period and later by the progressive writers known in Kannada as the Pragatishila writers to bring literature out of its ivory tower and to make it more responsive to the needs of the contemporary society had somehow not yielded fruit. There was a feeling among the rebel writers that the hegemonic literary and cultural establishment in Kannada was somehow preventing the open exploration of the experiences which were very unique to the marginalized communities. It was this which became a kind of a motive for a large number of the protest movements which took place not only in the 70s but also in the 80s. I am referring to a kind of a feeling among the writers that Kannada literature had somehow secluded itself from the lived experiences of the community and it had become immune to the changes which were taking place in the Kannada sensibility. The other ideological feature of the Bandaya movement in Kannada was that the writer should also take on the role of an activist. In fact, this is a pattern which has abided and remained with Kannada literature even in the later phases. The idea that a writer cannot consider himself as an aesthete working in his ivory tower with no connectivity at all with the pressures of the community. The Bandaya movement rejected this role of the writer as purely committed only to formal perfection in literature and only to an aesthetic pursuit. The rebel writers believed that the temper of the times was such that it necessitated the writer's direct participation in the political and the social struggles. I have already referred to some of the very important social and the political changes which had started taking place in the early 1970s. In retrospect, it appears as though this can be, even in sociological terms, described as a very major shift in the history of modern Karnataka. The rebel writers were demanding that the writers who had earlier belonged to the modernist phase and thereby they had subscribed to an ideology of individualism and individual pursuit of aesthetic experience should now make a changeover and they should seek forms of expression which could reach out to the common reader. The third important ideological position was that there was also need to broaden the aesthetic horizons of Kannada literature. All said and done, ever since a standard dialect was adopted during the New Dawn period for the literary expression in Kannada, many of the other Kannadas, I mean the dialectal forms of Kannada, those forms which also carried with them the memories and the lived experiences of the smaller subaltern communities, had rarely found a space in literary expression. Therefore, the Bandaya writers, who initially also included the major Dalit writers, they felt that there was now need to give up the prudery when it comes to the language of literary expression. Now, these were, as one can see, very broad ideological positions. There was nothing very specific, very particular about the programs and the agenda that the rebel group of writers had drawn up for themselves. But this made a very important impact, mainly because the readership in Kannada was also by then started expanding. There are two shapes which the expansion takes place. I'll be talking about it later. One is the way in which the middle class readership, the so-called middle class reading public, had really become much bigger by the time the rebel writers started addressing these ideological issues. The other is that the youth who came from the Dalit and the backward communities, who are now students in colleges and universities, they felt that somehow there was a kind of a gulf between their experiences of living in Dalit ghettos and communities in their own villages and what Kannada literature was trying on the whole to express. This kind of a powerful feeling of being alienated from mainstream Kannada literature, of a very powerful feeling that this literature had failed to give an expression to their experiences, it led to a cultural event, a political event, which is generally recognized by historians as the triggering factor for the turbulence of the 70s. This was the public occasion on which Sri Basavalingappa, one of the most eminent ministers in the cabinet of Devaraj Arasu, on a public occasion made a comment on Kannada literature. Using a very earthy and a very telling metaphor, he said that from the perspective of the Dalit and the subalternized communities, mainstream Kannada literature was almost like cattle feed or fodder. The earthy word that the minister had used was busa. It refers to the fodder which is mixed up and given as food to cattle. In fact, in retrospect, it seems to be a very valid statement for Sri Basavalingappa to have been made at that point of time. Because after all, he was saying that if you look at the mainstream Kannada literature and also at the gamut of experiences which had formed the subject of Kannada literature, it's very clear that a very large zone of experience had been left out from the mainstream literature. Sri Basavalingappa, in fact, was raising a question which now I think is a question which every academic tries to work upon and to do his research in. The question is of representation, of hegemony, and of the relationship between the power structure in the society and the subtle power structure which works in the literary establishment. But the way in which he articulated his dissatisfaction with mainstream Kannada literature and the metaphor that he had used in order to do so was immediately demonized by the media in Karnataka, and this led to a spate of protests against the minister's statement. As it always happens, this statement of the minister was deliberately misunderstood and it was interpreted as a derogatory statement, insulting as far as the honor of Kannada culture and literature is concerned. This led to two kinds of dynamism in Kannada society in that decade. One was the pro-establishment move by the organizations and individuals who wanted to use the umbrella term Kannada language and Kannada culture in order to oppose the perspective which the minister had introduced into the discussion of literature. The other was the perspective of the Dalit youth who were, as I had said earlier, seeking a distinctive social and political identity for themselves and a space for themselves in modern Karnataka. These youth felt that the kind of response by the literary establishment to the critique offered by Sri Basavalingappa was an indication of the fact that there was not going to be space for them to establish their identity and to express their own critique of the prevalent society unless they organized themselves politically. This led to the establishment of the Dalita Sangharsha Samiti, which happened just a little while later. I have already mentioned that the ground was prepared for the establishment of such a phenomenally successful organization because of the work done by the smaller organizations which had already in a way disseminated the ideology which would make such a broad political and cultural organization very necessary. In fact, when the Dalita Sangharsha Samiti was established by the leading Dalit writers and activists of Karnataka, they were very clear that the organization would not be a political organization, it would be a cultural organization. In fact, as I had mentioned a while ago, it was the Vakuta, the Association of All Kannada Writers, which had later led to the establishment of the Bandaya or the movement of the rebel writers, and the major Dalit writers who were erstwhile members of the Bandaya movement now came out and went in support of the Dalita Sangharsha Samiti. The reasons were not just political or individual. There was a very honest feeling among the Dalit writers that even getting labeled as victims of a caste society or victims of a class society would also not be adequate enough to enough for their experiences to be articulated in a very distinctive manner. Therefore, ideologically there was a kind of a divergence between the rebel writers and the Dalit writers, and this led to not only the establishment of the Dalita Sangharsha Samiti but also to the emergence of Dalit writing. Two of the great scholars who have worked on Dalit literature in Kannada, namely Dr. Suji Taru and Dr. K. Satyanarayana, they feel that the movement which was started by the Dalita Sangharsha Samiti in Karnataka was the one and the only example of a Dalit movement becoming a mass movement in modern India. And I do not think that they are exaggerating. If one goes by the records of the time and the annals of the activities of the DSS during the period, one can realize that it was a phenomenal mass movement spreading to every nook and corner of Karnataka, energizing and mobilizing people belonging to the Dalit communities, and immediately taking up participation in the political and the other issues which troubled this decade in the history of modern Karnataka. But what's important for students of literature is that this was not just a phenomenon which can be described in sociological terms. There was an inseparable relationship between the aesthetic expression given to these aspirations, to the struggles of the Dalit community, and the political cultural activities of the organization itself. This has to be emphasized because sometimes a wrong perception can be seen among the readers of Dalit literature who believe that it was only a byproduct of a social phenomenon. A proper reading of of this vast and rich body of writing produced during the 70s and the 80s by the Dalit writers is enough to convince anyone that this was an aesthetic phenomenon also, because the way in which the consciousness of the people was raised and the way in which the political and cultural mobilization was organized made use of possibly every form of expression and communication. All forms of art, dance and song were also used as powerfully as literature. One can say that for the first time, the artificial compartmentalization between various forms of cultural expression were broken for the first time as far as the Kannada literary tradition is concerned, because previously there had been some kind of an unwritten caste system between the literary expression, which was very acceptable to the cultural establishment, and all other forms of people's expression, which were dubbed and marginalized as only folk and oral traditions. And what we see during the 70s is that the Dalit writers were opening themselves out to the potentialities not only of the language of the people, but also to the oral traditions of narration, of use of metaphors and images. Therefore, what we are talking about is not just a political expression of a changed sensibility. We are looking here at the formation of a very interesting and very rich, complex body of writing, which brought about a change in the Kannada literary scene. This was also helped by the influence of what was happening in the neighboring states. The Kannada Dalit writers were already familiar with the Dalit writings in Marathi and also the writing of the progressive movement in Andhra. These writings in Marathi and Telugu had been immediately translated, and going by the records of the leaders of the movement, it's also clear that even before the translations became available in print form, they had become a part of the people's lore. The poems written in Marathi and in Telugu had found a very suitable translation in the colloquial idiom of the common people. And interestingly, the Dalita Sangharsh Samiti made use of this cultural way of mobilizing people and of trying to create a sense of a new identity. It's not surprising that such a broad movement addressing itself to very fundamental issues of social structure, hegemony, power, etc., should have led to a rich body of writing, which, as I said earlier, brought about a paradigmatic shift in Kannada literature. Two of the monumental works by major Dalit writers, which came out during the same decade, they in a way shaped the future of Dalit writing in Kannada. One was a collection of short stories by Devanuru Mahadeva, and the title of this very slender collection of short stories was Devanuru. It is now admitted by every literary scholar and historian that in a way Kannada history and the history of Kannada literature was not really prepared for the profound impact made by these short stories by Devanuru Mahadeva. He writes about exploitation, he writes about the humiliations, he writes about the underprivileged individuals, he writes about the everyday horrors that one can see in the ghettos and the huts of the Dalit people. But he does not write in a combative or in an aggressive mode. With tremendous love and compassion, he looks at the lives of these people without ever taking his eyes off from the fact that they are victims of a very rigid caste society. But he is also able, as a genuine poet, to look into the possibilities of creativity and the possibilities of the subaltern imagination among these people. It is this combination of irony and lyricism and compassion which makes the short stories of Devanuru Mahadeva a turning point as far as Kannada is concerned. If one looks at the narrative modes with which Mahadeva experimented, and let's remember he was a very young writer, a student when his major short stories first appeared in print. And here was a very talented young writer already experimenting with all possibilities of the narrative modes. And not just that, he also broke an unwritten rule in the Kannada narrative that though one may make use of the language of the people themselves as far as the dialogue is concerned, the narrative would always be in the standard dialect, whereas Mahadeva breaks this ground rule and he tries to make the earthy dialectal language, the language spoken around Nanjangud, which he inherited as a child growing up there. He makes this language the language of the narration. It's not just that, he creates a cosmos, a Dalit cosmos, which is sufficient unto itself. It's an alternative cosmos which shares very little with the traditions of the main culture. It is this cosmos which he so patiently, with a great devotion to the art of the narrative, reconstructs in his short stories. Every small thing of this cosmos, the language, the gestures, the sighs, the laughter of the people, the huts and the ghettos, all these become living things in the narratives of Devanuru Mahadeva. This has to be emphasized again because we are once again not talking about just recording and documenting the physical details of Dalit community. We are talking about an aesthetic reconstruction, which is possible only when you have a passionate inwardness with the community's experience and you also have the mastery over the language. It is these two gifts that Mahadeva possessed, and they are in evidence in the short stories published in the 70s, which immediately created a huge reception and space for Dalit writing in Kannada. The other monumental work was the collection of songs and poems by Siddhalingayya. Undoubtedly, Siddhalingayya is the finest Dalit poet in the Kannada tradition. He was also a young student who had been energized by the political turmoils of the decade, and in fact he had been a participant, and as he humorously describes in his autobiography, almost a martyr to the riots which had been triggered off by the comment made by the minister in Devarajar's cabinet. It is this young poet who, in a very bold and original manner, reformulated the very idiom and the register of Kannada poetry. For the first time, curse words, impolite words, very earthy expressions, metaphors and images which had till then been confined only to a Dalit ghetto now make their appearance in a very big way on the canvas of poetry. I do not think such a thing had happened elsewhere, maybe except in Marathi poetry a few years before Siddhalingayya published his own poems. These poems gave an expression to the passionate anger of the Dalit communities, who had not only gone through inhuman experiences but had also been prevented from finding any kind of cultural or literary expression to those powerful experiences of insult, of humiliation, of being deprivileged in a very powerful caste society. He has written two categories of poems, which I think are best explained by making use of two terms coined by our great critic, the late Sri D.R. Nagaraj. Writing about Dalit literature, the late D.R. Nagaraj made a couple of points which I think provide a guideline for anybody who wants to look at the Dalit literature of that particular period. He says that the difference between the writing about Dalits, on Dalits by other writers, and Dalit literature written by Dalit writers themselves is that in the previous category of others writing about Dalits, Dalits were the object of literature. They were the object, the material for literature. When the Dalit writers themselves started writing about the Dalit experiences, they became the subject of that literature. It's not as though an outsider with maybe pity or compassion or ideological understanding is looking at the experiences of the Dalits. It's one of the community who is trying to articulate these experiences. It is Devanur Mahadeva who expresses this feeling of the Dalit writer who is writing about these experiences for the first time. He says it gives the Dalit writer a feeling of pain and agony because he is literate, he is able to write, he is able to make use of a literary expression, but behind him there are all those thousands and thousands of his own people who have never been given space in either literature or culture. It is these two terms coined by D.R. Nagaraj, the critic, which help us to understand what kind of a shift was taking place in Kannada literature. Here were the people who had been treated as objects of pity and objects of compassion, who are now speaking for themselves in their own voices. This can be seen in the poetry of Siddhalingayya. I mentioned the two kinds of poems and songs that Siddhalingayya contributed not only during this decade but later. One category is of those poems which directly address the oppressors. They directly address the members of the upper caste communities and also the political establishment. These are poems which try to shock the reader, which try to create a shocked awareness among those who read those poems or listen to those songs. They also try to create a feeling of guilt among those who have been knowingly or unknowingly participating in the processes of exploitation. The other category of poems that Siddhalingayya wrote are more inward looking. They are more metaphorically, I should say, rich and complex. And this is where the pain and the agony of living as a Dalit in a modern and independent and constitutionally egalitarian society is highlighted. He uses paradox, he uses irony, hyperbole, exaggeration in order to deal with all these experiences of the Dalit community in a modern society. Apart from these two monumental works of Mahadeva and Siddhalingayya, there was also this unique phenomenon of hundreds of talented writers beginning to write short stories and poetry in Kannada. In fact, one would be right to describe this as the new dawn. It is not the romantic phase which should be described as the Navodaya. The real rising, the real new rise was during this period when hundreds of young writers who were very new to literary expression suddenly found the energy and the talent to give powerful expression to their experiences. Apart from the major works of Mahadeva and Siddhalingayya, one can also mention a large number of poets and writers of songs. It's not just Kotiganhalli Ramayya, it's not just Munakudu Chinnaswamy who started writing a little later. All of them, they found a new freedom of expression, energized on the one hand by the political momentum given by the Dalita Sangharsha Samiti and also by the challenges which the politics and the culture of the time had placed before them. We also see that the Dalit writing enters into a more mature phase very quickly. Once again, I would like to make use of two terms which the critic D.R. Nagaraj had used. He said that the writing in the 70s and the 80s, it showed two orientations. One orientation he described as the writing of social rage. The young Dalit writers had first of all to give an expression to the social rage, a rage emanating from memory of exploitation and humiliation, and also by the awareness that even now they had to struggle in order to make use of their own language in order to give expression to their experiences. He says that it is this social rage which seems to be the controlling factor in the early phase of Dalit writing. But there is another orientation also. D.R. Nagaraj describes this as the orientation towards a spiritual quest. By spiritual quest, D.R. Nagaraj was referring to the attempt to imagine a spiritual equality beyond the inequalities of caste and oppression. And he says that sensitive writers like Mahadeva and also the most important poet of that decade, K.B. Siddhayya, were trying to explore. They were trying to go beyond the confines of the terms of exploitation, humiliation. They were also trying to look at other possibilities. They were also trying to look at possibilities beyond the horizons of the political movements of the time. The good fortune of Kannada literature was that these two orientations, the orientation towards rebellion and protest and the orientation towards a more inward-looking exploration of experience, came together to produce a body of very interesting literature during this period. When we look at the fortunes of the Bandaya movement itself, one can say without any exaggeration that the Bandaya movement of the rebel writers in Kannada ensured that in all the phases to come, the Kannada writer would always be very conscious of the fact that he has to be committed to the social reality. There has not been any turning back after this major intervention made by the Bandaya writers in Kannada. As I had said earlier, the role of the writer now began to change. He was not just a user of language, not just a master craftsman. He had to be a part of the struggles going on in the society and an activist. In retrospect, one can again see that this role of the Kannada writer seems to have remained unchanged in all the movements which took place much later in the decades to come. For example, the communal movements in Karnataka, and the movement for the protection of ecology and environment. In all these socially meaningful movements, it's the Kannada writers who have made a direct intervention, who have been participants in the public protests also. This is a paradigm shift which was introduced by the Bandaya or the rebel writers in Kannada. They also energized a lot of writing as far as the short fiction is concerned. In fact, it is in the narratives of the decade and the next decade, I mean 1970s and later 1980s, that one can see the productive influence of the Bandaya movement. It is said by discerning critics that the Bandaya movement in itself was not able to produce a masterpiece, let's say something that can be compared with the better works of the Dalit writers. But at the same time, the fact which we should not ignore is that the very canvas of short story writing in Kannada expanded beyond all expectations because of the interventions made by the protest writers or the rebel writers of the period. They also drew up the contours, or let me say the outline of a new aesthetic. This was in protest against the aesthetic which had been formulated by the Navya or the modernist writers. Without elaborating on the aesthetics of the Navya period, I would like to point out that the emphasis in Navya aesthetics was on formal perfection, the perfection of the language used, the organic structure, etc., etc. And these, as one can see, were aspects of an aesthetics which is about a poem in print, in the sense it was not about other forms of expression outside the confines of the literary. As I had mentioned earlier, the Dalit movement from its very inception had started making use of all forms of verbal expression, all forms of artistic expression, and it is natural that even the Bandaya writers of the time should have found the aesthetics of modernity in Kannada a little too limiting and a little too confining as far as their experiences are concerned. The new aesthetic spoke of literature being open-ended, literature being prepared, if necessary, to sacrifice a little bit of its preoccupation with aesthetic beauty and perfection in order to create a bridge between the writer and the readers. A mention has to be made here of the earlier Pragatishila writers in Kannada. For example, novelists like Anakru and Tarasu, who were progressive writers whose ideologies were very similar to the ideologies of the Bandaya or the rebel writers. It is these two novelists who had created a large readership for the Kannada novel. It is these two writers who had popularized the genre so that later novelists could make use of a well-established literary genre like the novel and use it for exploring all kinds of experiences. Something very similar happened owing to the influence of the Bandaya writers in Kannada. They were able, first of all, to open out the boundaries of literature, to make people feel that they were not just readers, but they were participants in the very processes of the creation of literature. And the response of the reader was also now brought in as a very important criterion as far as aesthetics is concerned. Therefore, one could argue that the ideological position and then the effects of the organizational agenda of the Bandaya movement in Karnataka, they shaped the future of Kannada writing for decades to come. We have a large number of important critics who formulated and gave some kind of a shape to the ideological positions of the Bandaya movement. One can speak about Barguru Ramachandrappa, who has been from the very beginning a theoretician who has tried to formulate the aesthetics of rebel writing. We also have our important contemporary writer Tarikere Rehmat, who has continued the tradition. We also have very important writers of fiction, and as I was mentioning earlier, it was this genre which found a new breath of life because of the impact of the Bandaya ideology. We have writers like Kum Veerbhadrappa, for example, who in his hundreds of short stories and his novels has created a world which still appears to the common Kannada reader to be very, very different from the world that he has seen and he has experienced. Veerbhadrappa takes us to all those unexplored experiences of violence, of a feudal order which continues to exist and continues to exploit despite all the democratic changes, and also of the other forms of exclusion which people have to undergo just by the fact that they belong to the oppressed communities. It is this which made the narratives of the Bandaya period so very important to the Kannada tradition. It also had another kind of perhaps unexpected fallout, and this was the way in which Bandaya writing was able to give cultural confidence to women, to Muslim writers, to writers who had never thought that they would be able to write about their very ordinary and commonplace experiences. If one looks beyond the decade when Bandaya and Dalit literatures in Kannada came into existence, for example, towards the decade when a tabloid like Lankesh Patrike became the organ of the Kannada culture and Kannada community, one can see the way in which the ground was prepared by the rebel writers and the protest writers. They took on very big challenges of, first of all, re-examining the main tradition. One of the critical preoccupations of the Bandaya writers was to subject the classics of Kannada literature, to put them under scrutiny once again, and to try to see if there was, even as an undercurrent in these great works, an undercurrent which was supportive of the oppressive structures of society. For example, one can think of an important essay by B. Krishnappa, who was the founder member of the DSS, raising very important questions about the inadequacies of the fictional world created by Kuvempu. Such questions were asked about the mainstream writers, and there was an attempt to rewrite the history of Kannada literature from a subalternist point of view. The other important product of the Bandaya movement was that writers started looking at the possibility of not only documenting but also of trying to understand the marginalized communities as independent life worlds, as each community comprising a cosmos of its own. This also added to the strength of the Kannada writing during the 20th century. It also, not just the ideology of the protest writers, but also the agenda they created for writing in Kannada, also opened out Kannada literature to issues of gender and issues of location. If one looks back at the earlier phases in Kannada literature, except in some of the major writers of the Navodaya period and in the major writers of the progressive writers of the 40s and the 50s, one does not find a central space given to issues of gender and issues of location. These two become very important to Kannada writing from the time the Bandaya writers started formulating their own new aesthetics. Critics have pointed out that the influence of the protest writing in Kannada should actually be seen in the shifts which we find in the major practicing writers of that time. For example, a number of Navya writers like Yashwant Chittala and Shantinath Desai and even P. Lankesh himself, they were able to change the very perspective with which they were writing. If one looks at the fiction of these writers who were earlier subscribing to the Navya ideology and aesthetics, and look at what kind of fiction they wrote during the later phase of their career, we find that qualitatively the fiction they write after the Bandaya movement made its impact is very, very different, because this narrative is more open-ended, it is more experimental, and it is also far more responsive to the social issues which were foregrounded by the Bandaya or the protest writers. Therefore, one could actually talk about not a linear history of mainstream writing being followed by Bandaya writing and then being accompanied by Dalit writing. One can see a confluence, a flowing together of various streams of writing in modern Kannada literature, and this is a mutually enriching phenomenon. If we look at the major writers of the second generation of Dalit writing in Kannada, we discover a number of extremely talented poets and writers who are now trying to confront the new challenges of an increasingly urbanizing society, new challenges of globalization, new challenges of a displacement and dislocation of the Dalit communities because of the global changes which are taking place. It is these young writers who are no longer following the model of the first generation Dalit writers. They know that they now belong to a very changed society. They now know that they can no longer be writing only about small Dalit ghettos and communities. They have to write about the double jeopardy, the double challenge which the modern Dalit individual has to confront in the modern society. Therefore, if we put together the writings of the first and the second generation of Dalit and Bandaya writers in Kannada, we can certainly say that through the writings of writers belonging to these schools, Kannada literature went through a major shift in its sensibility, and we owe a great deal to these two cultural and literary movements of the decade. Thank you.